Delphine's trembling fingers fumbled with the delicate gold band as she pushed through the wooden door of Gallagher's general store.
Oh.
Desperation etched across her dirt-streaked face. The bell's harsh clang seemed to mock her as she stumbled toward the counter, where barrels of grain stood like silent sentinels against her hunger. "Please," she whispered, sliding the ring across the worn wood surface. "Just enough flour for bread. It's all I have left." Old man Gallagher barely glanced up from his ledger, his weathered hands continuing their scratching across the pages. "Wedding ring, is it? Won't fetch much these days. Half the town's trying to trade jewelry for beans." The ring had belonged to her grandmother, passed down through generations of women who'd weathered storms far worse than the drought that had claimed her family's farm. Now it represented her final thread of dignity, about to be severed for a few pounds of flour. "It's pure gold," Delphine insisted, her voice cracking. "Please, I haven't eaten in 2 days." Gallagher's eyes finally lifted, cold and calculating. "Gold don't feed cattle or water crops, missy. Times like these, it's just shiny metal." He pushed the ring back toward her with one finger. "Maybe try the saloon. Heard tell they're hiring ... entertainment?" Heat flooded Delphine's cheeks at the implication. She snatched the ring back, fury temporarily overwhelming her hunger. The bell chimed again as someone entered behind her, but she was too focused on her humiliation to turn around. Actually, a deep voice cut through the tension. "I'd say that ring's worth quite a bit more than you're offering, Gallagher." Delphine spun around to find herself facing a tall man with sun-browned skin and eyes the color of sagebrush. His clothes marked him as a working rancher, leather chaps dusty from the trail, boots worn but well-maintained, hat tilted at an angle that suggested confidence without arrogance. "Isn't that right, Maverick?" Gallagher's tone shifted, suddenly deferential. "Didn't expect to see you in town today." The stranger Maverick stepped closer to the counter, his presence filling the small space with an energy that made Delphine's pulse quicken despite her exhaustion. "My father sent me for supplies. Seems like perfect timing." His gaze found hers, and something passed between them that felt like lightning before a storm. "The lady needs provisions," Maverick continued, not breaking eye contact with Delphine. "Put together a week's worth of supplies. Flour, beans, salt, pork, coffee, whatever she needs." "Hold on," Gallagher protested. "She ain't got nothing to trade but that ring, and I already told her." "Put it on the Crosswind Ranch account," Maverick said firmly. "My father will settle up next time he's in town." Delphine found her voice, though it came out smaller than she intended. "I can't accept charity." Maverick's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile, but held warmth nonetheless. "Who said anything about charity? I figure a woman with hands like yours," he nodded toward her calloused palms, "marked by honest work, knows her way around a ranch. We're short-handed with the drought and all." The wagon ride to Crosswind Ranch stretched through rolling hills, painted gold by the afternoon sun. Each bump and jostle sending awareness crackling between Delphine and the enigmatic rancher beside her. She clutched the sack of provisions in her lap like a lifeline, still unable to fully believe her fortune had changed so suddenly. "You don't know anything about me," she said finally, breaking the comfortable silence. "I could be a thief, a murderer." Maverick's laugh rumbled like distant thunder. "Well, are you? That's not the point, isn't it?" He guided the horses around a particularly deep rut. "Besides, I know enough. You'd rather starve than sell yourself. You worked that farm until your hands bled. You love someone enough, too. Trade your grandmother's ring for their next meal." Delphine's head snapped toward him. "How could you possibly know the ring's got initials inside?" "Saw them when Gallagher was examining it. And there's a child somewhere, isn't there? Someone depending on you." Her silence was answer enough. Little Cordelia, barely 6 years old, waited in the abandoned line shack where they'd been sheltering. Since losing the farm, her daughter didn't understand why they'd had to leave their home, why Mama cried when she thought no one was looking, why their bellies stayed empty despite all of Delphine's prayers. "My daughter," she whispered. "Father died in the war. The farm. I tried to keep it going, but the drought took everything." Maverick pulled the wagon to a stop beneath a grove of cottonwoods, their leaves rustling secrets in the evening breeze. When he turned to face her fully, His expression held no pity, only understanding that cut deeper than sympathy ever could. "Mother died when I was 12, he said quietly. "Fever took her quick. My father never remarried, said lightning didn't strike the same place twice for men like him. Maybe he was right about that, but wrong about everything else." The admission hung between them like a bridge neither had expected to cross so soon. Delphine found herself studying the strong line of his jaw, the way his hands held the reins with gentle authority, the quiet sadness that flickered behind his confident exterior. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. "Because when I saw you in that store, willing to trade away your past for someone else's future, I recognized something I'd been looking for without knowing it." His voice grew rough. "And because my father taught me that sometimes the most important things come disguised as the most desperate moments." In the distance, the Crosswind Ranch spread across the valley like a promise-weathered barns and corrals. Fields that had somehow survived the drought through careful tending and stubborn hope. Smoke rose from the main house chimney, carrying scents of home-cooked meals and possibility. "I won't be a burden," Delphine said firmly. "Whatever work you have, I can do it." "I don't doubt that for a second." Vet clicked his tongue, urging the horses forward again. "The question is, what happens when you realize you don't have to carry the whole world on your shoulders anymore?" The Crosswind Ranch house rose from the prairie like something carved from dreams and determination, its wraparound porch welcoming weary souls home. Delphine's breath caught as they approached, not from the building's modest grandeur, but from the sight of a small figure darting between the porch columns. "Mama." Cordelia's voice pierced the evening air as she launched herself from the steps. Maverick had somehow retrieved her daughter from the line shack while Delphine waited in town, a kindness that left her speechless. "Delia, sweetheart." Delphine slid from the wagon before it fully stopped, catching her daughter in an embrace that felt like coming back to life. The child's small body trembled against hers from excitement, not hunger, thank God. "The nice man gave me cookies," Cordelia whispered against her mother's neck. "Real ones, with sugar. And there's a lady inside who smells like cinnamon and talks like singing." An older woman emerged from the house, wiping flour-dusted hands on a checkered apron. Her silver hair was pulled back in a practical bun, but her eyes held the same warmth that Delphine had glimpsed in Maverick's. "You must be Delphine," the woman said, her voice carrying the gentle authority of someone accustomed to healing hearts along with bodies. "I'm Evangeline Crosswind, Maverick's aunt. We prepared the guest room for you and your daughter." "Mrs. Crosswind, I can't impose like this," Delphine began. But Evangeline waved away her protests with a flour-dusted hand. "Nonsense. This ranch was built on the understanding that neighbors help neighbors. Come inside before the night chill sets in." The interior of the house wrapped around them like a warm embrace, worn wooden floors polished by generations of boots. Quilts draped over sturdy furniture, and the lingering aroma of beef stew that made Delphine's empty stomach clench with longing. Cordelia's eyes went wide at the sight of the dinner table, set with more food than they'd seen in months. "Sit," Evangeline commanded gently, ladling stew into bowls. "Both of you. Questions can wait until bellies are full." Maverick appeared. In the doorway, having unhitched the horses and settled them for the night, he'd removed his hat, revealing hair the color of autumn wheat, slightly mussed from the day's work. When his eyes found Delphine's across the lamplit room, something shifted in the air between them, a recognition that went deeper than gratitude or attraction. "Pa's riding the North Range tonight," he said, settling into a chair across from them. "You'll meet him tomorrow. Fair warning, he's got strong opinions about most everything, but his heart's in the right place." Cordelia giggled around a mouthful of stew. "Do you have horses I can pet?" "We do indeed," Maverick replied seriously, as if her question deserved the utmost consideration. "There's a mare named Buttercup who's particularly fond of little girls who know how to be gentle." As the evening wore on, Delphine found herself relaxing for the first time in months. Cordelia chattered happily about everything she'd seen, while Evangeline shared stories of the ranch's history and Maverick's childhood adventures. The conversation flowed like honey, sweet and golden, binding them together in ways that felt both new and ancient. When Evangeline finally rose to clear the dishes, she fixed Delphine with a knowing look. Tomorrow we'll get you properly settled. There's always work to be done on a ranch, and extra hands are a blessing, not a burden. Later, as Delphine tucked Cordelia into a real bed with clean sheets and soft pillows, her daughter's sleepy voice cut straight to her heart. "Mama, are we home now?" Delphine smoothed the dark curls from her daughter's forehead, tears she'd held back all day, finally spilling free. Through the window, she could see Maverick in the yard, checking on the horses one final time before bed. His movements economical and sure in the moonlight. "I think we might be, sweetheart," she whispered. "I think we just might be." Dawn came early to Crosswind Ranch, announced by roosters and the gentle lowing of cattle in distant pastures. Delphine woke to unfamiliar sounds of prosperity horses, whinnying in well-maintained corrals, the steady rhythm of axes splitting wood, voices calling to each other across the yard with easy familiarity. She dressed quickly in her worn calico dress, the only decent clothing she owned, and crept downstairs to find Evangeline already bustling about the kitchen. Coffee percolated on the stove, filling the air with rich promise. "Sleep well?" Evangeline asked, not looking up from the biscuit dough she was kneading. "Cordelia's still dreaming, I'd wager. Better than I have in months." Delphine accepted the offered cup of coffee gratefully. "Mrs. Crosswind, I need to know what you expect from me." "What kind of work?" "Call me Evangeline, dear. And as for work, we'll figure that out together. This ranch has been my home for 30 years, since I married Maverick's uncle. When he passed, Rufus, that's Maverick's father, insisted I stay. Family doesn't abandon family, he says." The kitchen door swung open, admitting a weathered man with steel-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. His gaze swept over Delphine with the practiced assessment of someone accustomed to reading both horses and humans. "So you're the young lady who's got my son acting like a lovesick calf," Rufus Crosswind said without preamble. Heat flooded Delphine's cheeks. "Mr. Crosswind, I assure you, Rufus," he interrupted, pouring himself coffee. "I wasn't criticizing. Boy's been moping around here for 2 years since that banker's daughter ran off to San Francisco. About time something shook him out of his sulk." Evangeline swatted her brother-in-law with a dish towel. "Ignore him, Delphine. He's got all the subtlety of a charging bull." "Where is Maverick?" Delphine asked, surprised by how much the question mattered to her. Checking the water troughs, Rufus replied, "Drought's been hard on everyone, but we've managed better than most. Good wells, careful management." His eyes studied her again. "Maverick tells me you've got experience with livestock." "Some," Delphine admitted. "My father raised cattle before the war took him. I helped with birthing, doctoring sick animals. Did what I could to keep our farm running after my husband died." Something shifted in Rufus's expression, respect, replacing assessment. "That's harder work than most men could handle. Evangeline, show her around when she's ready. Let her choose what suits her." By mid-morning, Delphine found herself in the barn with Evangeline, marveling at the well-organized stalls and the healthy gleam of the horses' coats. Everything here spoke of careful tending, of people who understood that survival meant more than just getting by, it meant building something that could last. "There he is," Evangeline murmured, nodding toward the barn's far end. Maverick stood beside a magnificent bay stallion, his voice low and soothing as he examined the animal's front hoof. Sunlight slanted through the wooden slats, casting golden bars across his broad shoulders. When he looked up and caught sight of Delphine, his face transformed with a smile that made her heart stumble. "Morning," he called, releasing the horse's hoof and straightening. "Hope you slept well." "Very well, thank you." The formal words felt inadequate for everything she wanted to say. "I was hoping to discuss the work arrangements." "Walk with me," interrupted gently, approaching with that same easy confidence he'd shown in town. "There's something I want to show you." They walked together through the ranch yard, past corrals where horses grazed contentedly, and gardens where vegetables grew in neat, irrigated rows. Delphine noticed how the other ranch hands tipped their hats respectfully to Maverick, how he knew each animal by name, how his presence seemed to bring order to the organized chaos of ranch life. "Here," he said finally, stopping beside a smaller house nestled among cottonwood trees. "It's been empty since our foreman married and moved to his own spread. 2 bedrooms, kitchen, everything you and Cordelia would need." Delphine stared at The little house, with its blue-painted shutters and flower boxes beneath the windows, it looked like something from a fairy tale too perfect to be real. "I can't pay rent," she said quietly. "Not yet. Who mentioned rent?" Maverick's hand brushed hers, sending electricity racing up her arm. "Consider it part of your wages. We need someone who understands animals, who can help with the difficult births and sick cattle. Someone who won't run at the first sign of trouble." She turned to face him fully, searching his face for the catch she was certain must exist. "Are you doing this? Really?" Maverick was quiet for a long moment, his gaze drifting toward the distant mountains where storm clouds gathered. "Because sometimes God puts exactly what you need right in front of you," he said finally. "And only a fool would be too proud to recognize it." 3 weeks at Crosswind Ranch had transformed both Delphine and Cordelia from hollow-eyed refugees into something approaching their former selves. Cordelia's laughter rang through the yards again as she helped gather eggs and feed the chickens. While Delphine found herself remembering skills she'd thought lost forever, she was elbow-deep in, assisting with a difficult calf birth when she first heard the commotion in the yard, raised voices, the thunder of multiple horses, and underneath it all, a woman's sharp commands that cut through the afternoon heat like a blade. "Where is he?" the voice demanded. "Where's Maverick?" Delphine exchanged glances with Jebediah, the ranch's oldest hand, who was helping hold the struggling cow. "Best finish up here quick, miss," he muttered. "That's Vivian Ashford. She's trouble." By the time they'd successfully delivered the calf and ensured both mother and baby were healthy, the voices had moved inside the main house. Delphine cleaned up at the water pump, trying to ignore the sick feeling growing in her stomach. She had no claim on Maverick beyond gratitude and employment, no right to feel jealous of whoever this Vivian might be. But as she approached the house to check on Cordelia, fragments of conversation drifted through the open windows. "Double quotes, ... 3 months in San Francisco, darling? I've come to my senses." The woman's voice was cultured, refined, everything Delphine wasn't. "Father's arranged the engagement announcement for next month. Vivian." Maverick's voice was carefully controlled. "We discussed this before you left. What we had. It wasn't enough. Wasn't enough." The woman's laugh held sharp edges. "Maverick, I'm offering you everything. My father's banking connections, social standing, a future beyond this dusty wasteland." Delphine found herself frozen beside the porch steps, unable to move forward or retreat. Through the window, she caught a glimpse of Vivian Ashford, elegant, dressed in a traveling costume that probably cost more than Delphine's entire wardrobe. She was beautiful in the way that opened doors and commanded attention, the kind of woman who belonged in drawing rooms and society pages. "This ranch isn't a wasteland," Maverick replied quietly. "It's home. It's everything my family built from nothing. It could be so much more with the right investments, the right connections." Vivian's voice softened, became coaxing. "We could modernize everything, bring in the latest equipment, expand beyond anything your father ever imagined." Cordelia's voice piped up from the kitchen, where she'd apparently been having cookies with Evangeline. Mama, are you coming? Miss Evangeline says I can help make supper." The conversation in the parlor stopped abruptly. Delphine's cheeks burned as she realized her presence in Cordelia's existence had just been revealed in the worst possible way. "Mama," Vivian's voice had gone cold. "Maverick, darling, you didn't mention you'd taken in ... charity cases." The front door opened before Delphine could flee, and Maverick appeared on the porch. His face was carefully blank, but she could see the storm brewing behind his eyes. "Delphine," he said, his voice gentle, despite the tension radiating from his shoulders. "I'd like you to meet Miss Vivian Ashford. Vivian, this is Delphine Rosewood, our new livestock specialist." Vivian appeared beside him, her calculating gaze taking in every detail of Delphine's work-stained dress and sun-darkened skin. "How ... practical," she said with a smile that never reached her eyes. "I'm sure she's very ... capable." The pause before each compliment landed like a slap. Delphine straightened her spine, drawing on reserves of pride she'd thought exhausted. "Miss Ashford," she replied evenly. "I hope you enjoy your visit." "Oh, it's not just a visit," Vivian said, sliding her arm through Maverick's with practiced ease. I'm here to plan our future together. Isn't that right, darling? The storm that had been threatening for days finally broke that night, driving rain against the windows of the little house with force that matched the tempest in Delphine's heart. She sat by the kitchen table, mending one of Cordelia's dresses by lamplight, while her daughter slept peacefully in the next room. Unaware of the adult complexities swirling around their temporary sanctuary, lightning illuminated the yard in stark flashes, and in one brilliant moment, she saw a figure running through the rain toward her door. Her heart leaped before reason could intervene. Only one person would brave such weather to reach her. Maverick's knock came soft but urgent. When she opened the door, he stood dripping on her threshold, his hat missing and his hair plastered, dark against his skull. "Can I come in?" he asked quietly. "I need to tell you something." She stepped aside wordlessly, acutely aware of her simple nightgown and robe, of the way his presence filled her small kitchen with electricity that had nothing to do with the storm outside. He remained by the door, as if crossing further into her space would compromise something precious. "Vivian left tonight," he said without preamble. "Took the evening train back to her father's bank in Denver." Delphine's hands stilled on the mending. "I'm sorry," she managed, though the words tasted like lies. "Are you?" His voice held gentle challenge. "Because I'm not. It should be she. Offered me everything most men dream of. Money, connections, a life of ease. Then why? ... Maverick stepped closer, close enough that she could see raindrops still clinging to his eyelashes, could smell the scent of rain and leather and something uniquely him that made her pulse race. "Because 3 weeks ago, I watched a woman walk into Gallagher's store ready to trade her most precious possession for a stranger's next meal. Because I've seen you gentle a spooked horse with nothing but patience and soft words. 'Cause my daughter lights up when you read her stories. And because you've brought laughter back to this house for the first time since my mother died." "Maverick." "Let me finish," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Vivian saw this ranch as something to change, to improve, to make worthy of her presence. But you see it as it is, a place where good people do honest work and take care of each other. You don't want to change us. You want to belong to us." Thunder crashed overhead, but Delphine barely heard it over the roaring in her ears. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that gold isn't what we need here. We need hands that know hard work. We need hearts that understand what family means. We need someone who sees home in weathered wood and honest sweat, instead of bank drafts and society pages." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. "Vivian left this behind, said to give it to the help as compensation for services rendered." Delphine's grandmother's ring gleamed in the lamplight as he poured it into his palm. "She bought it from Gallagher before she came here. Planned to return it to you as a gesture of ... magnanimity. I don't understand. She thought she could buy your gratitude. Make you beholden to her instead of..." His words trailed off. As he stepped closer still, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his rain-chilled body. "Instead of what?" she whispered. "Instead of recognizing that you're not someone who can be bought or sold or traded like livestock." His free hand reached up to cup her cheek, thumb brushing away tears she hadn't realized were falling. "You're someone worth choosing, someone worth building a life with." 6 months later, the church bells of Cedar Hollow rang out across the valley. Their joyful pealing carried on autumn wind that smelled of harvest and new beginnings. Delphine stood before the small mirror in the church's back room, adjusting the simple white dress that Evangeline had sewn with loving hands and careful stitches. "You look beautiful, Mama," Cordelia whispered, her own dress a miniature version of her mother's, complete with tiny pearl buttons and lace trim. She clutched a bouquet of wildflowers picked fresh that morning from the ranch's fields. Through the church's windows, Delphine could see the assembled guest ranch hands who'd become family. Neighbors who'd welcomed her with open arms and scattered throughout the congregation. The faces of people she'd helped through difficult times. Mrs. Henderson, a colicky baby she'd soothed through long nights. Old Pete, whose sick mare she'd nursed back to health. The widow Morrison, who'd found comfort in their shared understanding of loss and recovery. "Time, dear ones," Evangeline announced from the doorway, her eyes bright with unshed tears. She wore her finest dress, the blue silk she'd saved for special occasions, and carried herself with the dignity of a woman witnessing dreams come true. The church doors opened, and Delphine's breath caught at the sight of Maverick waiting at the altar. He'd traded his usual ranch clothes for a black suit that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders and the quiet strength that had drawn her to him from that first day in Gallagher's store. But it was his expression that stopped her heart wonder. In joy and a love so profound it seemed to transform the very air around him. Rufus offered his arm with gruff tenderness. "Ready, daughter?" he asked quietly. The word held weight, not just courtesy, but genuine acceptance into the family that had embraced both her and Cordelia without reservation. The walk down the aisle felt like floating, each step carrying her toward a future she'd never dared imagine. Cordelia scattered flower petals with serious concentration, while Evangeline played the small organ with tears streaming down her cheeks. When Delphine reached the altar, Maverick's hands found hers with the same gentle certainty that had marked everything about their courtship. The pastor, a kind man who'd known the Crosswind family for decades, smiled at the assembled crowd. "Dearly beloved," he began, but Delphine barely heard the familiar words. She was lost in Maverick's eyes, in the promise she saw there of partnership and passion and the kind of love that grew stronger through seasons of hardship. When the time came for vows, Maverick's voice carried clearly through the small church. "Delphine, you came to us in a moment of need, but you stayed because you chose to build something beautiful from broken pieces. You've taught me that real wealth isn't measured in gold or land or cattle, it's measured in laughter around the dinner table, hands that work together toward common dreams, in hearts that beat in rhythm with shared purpose." Lavigne's own vows came from depths she'd forgotten she possessed. "Maverick, you saw worth in me when I'd forgotten it myself. You offered me not just shelter, but home, not just work, but purpose, not just kindness, but love that asks for nothing except the chance to grow." The ring he slipped onto her finger was simple gold, fashioned by the local blacksmith from metal Maverick had traded for honestly. It would never match the elaborate jewelry Vivian had worn, but it represented something far more precious, a choice freely made, a future built on mutual respect and genuine affection. "You may kiss your bride," the pastor announced with satisfaction. Maverick's kiss was gentle and sure, full of promise for all the days ahead. Around them, the congregation erupted in cheers and applause, but Delphine heard only the whispered words he spoke against her lips. "Welcome home, Mrs. Crosswind." As they walked back down the aisle together, rice showering around them like blessings, Delphine caught sight of her reflection in the church's stained glass windows. The hollow-cheeked woman who'd tried to trade her grandmother's ring for food had been transformed into someone radiant with joy and belonging. Outside, the ranch hands had decorated Maverick's wagon with ribbons and wildflowers. Cordelia bounced with excitement as Rufus lifted her into the back, where she would ride with the other children to the reception in the ranch's main barn. "Ready for the rest of our lives?" Maverick asked, as he helped Delphine into the wagon seat. She looked back at the church where they'd just pledged their futures to each other, then toward Crosswind Ranch spreading across the valley like a promise kept. In the distance, cattle grazed peacefully in pastures that had survived drought through careful tending and stubborn hope. "I've been ready since the day you told me gold wasn't what you needed," she replied, settling beside him as naturally as if she'd been doing it all her life. As they rode toward home together, the autumn sun breaking through the clouds to paint everything golden, Delphine understood finally that some trades weren't about what you lost, but about what you gained. She'd tried to trade her ring for food that would sustain her body for a day. Instead, she'd found love that would nourish her soul for a lifetime. The wagon wheels turned steadily toward home, carrying them toward a future where broken things could be mended, where lost souls could find their way, and where love could bloom even in the hardest seasons, especially in the hardest seasons. Behind them, the church bells continued their joyful song, blessing the valley and all who dwelled within it with the music of new beginnings